I hope you all enjoyed meeting your neighbors, and I hope you've made some new friends and shared each other's contact information with each other so you can keep in touch. That's a wonderful thing to be able to do. In the interest of fairness to all of you, I'm going to go ahead and start. So what I'm going to do is just reintroduce, for the camera's sake, Mr. Tim Carter, who has an extensive history in remodeling and was named one of the top 50 remodelers in the United States of America by Remodeling Magazine. And I'm going to ask him if he will please share with us his thoughts on Agenda 21.
Thank you, Jen, and I want to thank the Andover Constitutional Freedom Alliance tonight, and I will thank Gregg Carson when he shows up for, participating in this really serious discussion tonight. And I wanted to let you know that we're gathered here tonight because this topic is so serious. Unfortunately, it's a really interesting topic that many, if you go out and talk to them, they actually feel it's harmless. And the reason that they feel that this topic is harmless is because of the way that it has been positioned and because there are extremely professional marketers behind it. So the way that the debate or the discussion was positioned was that, we were going to talk about Agenda 21 or the Sustainable Communities Initiative. What you need to understand, if you don't know much about this topic, is that they are one and the same. And that the Agenda 21, I'm going to give you a little bit of background of what it is. And actually, really what I wanted to do, though, before I get into that, is I wanted you to stop right now. And I want you to go back into time, and I want you to think, if you can remember back when you were a small child. And can you pull back on a really deep memory of when your mother, or maybe your father, read to you a fairy tale or a fable? And can you remember the one that they read to you that was by Charles Perrault, and it was called Little Red Riding Hood? All right, that's why we're here tonight. What we're talking about, Agenda 21, a Sustainable Communities Initiative, the Granite State Future, is Little Red Riding Hood in real life form right in front of your eyes. Okay, and if you remember what happened, you remember how Little Red Riding Hood got duped, right? The wolf was wearing, it was masquerading as grandma. All right, so what's happening is that the Sustainable Communities Initiative, as it's being promoted by our federal government, down here to the state levels, it's masquerading as Agenda 21. All right, so now, what's Agenda 21? Now, it's my job tonight, I was asked to come here to basically prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt that the Sustainable Communities Initiative is Agenda 21, and I guarantee that I can do that, and I guarantee I'll be able to show you also that the Granite State Future is the same thing. So here's a brief history of Agenda 21. This is what's really important to know. So Agenda 21, it really got its start back in 1976 as part of the Vancouver Plan of Action through the United Nations. That alone right there should be the big flashing yellow light, that this is Agenda 21 has its roots deeply set in the United Nations. And so that should, if you're a freedom-loving American, you should just stop and think, what do the other people in other countries of the world, why do they care about what we do in the United States of America? That's how I think about it. I don't think I need the people in England or France or some other country telling me how I need to live on my land in New Hampshire. But they feel differently. All right, so the Vancouver Plan of Action, it established that private ownership of property was socially unjust. That's an exact quote. And represented a danger to the planet. Do you want me to read that again? That the private ownership of property was socially unjust and represented a danger to the planet. It proposed returning private land to government control. I'm serious. I'm not making this up. You can look it up. All right. In 1987, so now you fast forward 11 years, the UN Brundtland Commission released a report which included the Vancouver Plan's recommendations. It also defined the term for the first time. This is the first time you'll find it if you go back and do a literature research. Sustainable development. All right. So what's the definition of sustainable development by the Brundtland Commission? I'll read it to you. It's the development that meets the needs of current generations without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And the UN set the definitions for current and future needs. They set the definition. All right, so that should scare you. Now, according to the report, according to this Brundtland Commission report, the only way to protect the Earth for the future is to expand government control over private property. I'm not making this up. You can look it up. All right. And they want to manage man's interaction with the environment and redistribute personal and global wealth. I'm not making this up. These actions taken together are sustainable development. According to the UN, sustainable development will result in humankind's developing in ways that protect the Earth for future generations. That's them. That's their definition. It might not be yours. So understand that. That's really important. The UN introduced these ideas to the world. This is the history of Agenda 21 now, and we're getting almost to the end of it. To the world. They were working on this now for 11 years. Then they worked another 5 years on it, behind their closed doors. And in 1992, they had a summit, and it's called the Rio Earth Summit down in South America. And a plan of action was released to the public called Agenda 21. You can actually get the book. You can go to Amazon and purchase the actual Agenda 21 book. I'm not making it up. The plan was voluntary and non-binding, but only until a member state, and that's state with a capital S, meaning the UN, just so you know, the UN refers to countries that belong to the United Nations as states. That should bother you, in my opinion. It should deeply trouble you. All right, but it was voluntary and non-binding only until a member state approved it and began implementation. So let's fast forward a little bit, just one more year, and guess what? The United States approved the plan. They approved the Agenda 21 plan via Executive Order number 12852, signed by President William Clinton. And that was issued in 1993. This executive order formed the President's Council on Sustainable Development for the sole purpose of bringing Agenda 21 to the United States. The authors of Agenda 21, okay, understand this, the authors at the UN, the people in the UN who were the authors of Agenda 21, served on the President's Council for Sustainable Development. And together they wrote regulations U.S. citizens must obey. These rules gradually return private land to the government and implement all other items in the Agenda 21 plan. One example of these regulations can be found in the Federal Register, Volume 63, Number 163, Monday, August 24th, 1998, under Notices. Look for EPA Sustainable Challenge Grant Program. Now, just so you know, all this stuff, don't worry about taking notes. There's a small slip of paper on that table over there, a very narrow piece of paper that says GraniteStateFutures.org, a website where you'll be able to download this if you want to read it for yourself. All right, so don't worry about taking notes. Now, in 1999, this President's Council on Sustainable Development was disbanded. And the reason it was disbanded here, because it had already embedded the Agenda 21 principles into all federal agencies. All federal agencies. So think about that. EPA, Department of Transportation, Housing and Urban Development, Department of Education, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They're
Tim,
all...
I'm going to ask you to hold for just a moment. Thank you.
Sorry.
It's okay. Please. Ladies and gentlemen, may I introduce you to the Honorable Gregg Carson.
Hello, everybody.
No apologies necessary. Please know that our hearts and prayers are with you and yours.
It's not that my dad has just got diagnosed with cancer earlier today. It's just that he also had a heart problem while he was in the doctor's office, and we spent the rest of the afternoon in the emergency room. I completely lost track of time, and sorry, so
we appreciate you being here, and please know that we all have your family in our thoughts and prayers.
Thank you very much.
Now, Mr. Carson has served as the Director for the New Hampshire Office of U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, as well as the Secretary for the New Hampshire GOP. Previously, he also served as the Assistant Majority Leader in the New Hampshire House of Representatives, as well as Chairman of the Rockingham County Republican Committee. To bring you, in all fairness, where we are at. Everybody has actually gotten to know their neighbor, and you have a wide variance of people who are from all aspects of the state, from Fremont to Alton to Laconia. The numbers of towns that were listed were actually quite large. Tim was giving us his perspective on the issue in regards to Agenda 21. And I'm gonna allow him to finish that and give you a few moments to just sit and please, if you need a glass of water or something. And then I'm gonna ask you to please explain sustainable communities from the other perspective. And what I've told everyone here is that this is an open discussion, that I want people to ask questions, that these are things that are going on in communities, and so we can all be informed voters, that when our communities are looking at these types of initiatives, we can make informed decisions. So Tim, I'll allow you to please continue.
Sure, thanks very much. Okay, so once again, these principles were, as I said, were embedded into every agency at the federal government at the highest levels. And they were intended to fulfill those because that was the deal that they made with the United Nations. All right, so now we'll fast forward to Mr. Carson's employer, the Federal Housing and Urban Development Agency. So right now, they're the lead federal agency right now for Agenda 21, which is the wolf in our fable. But they prefer to be known as Grandma. And if you haven't figured it out yet, you, me, and everybody else are Little Red Riding Hood because they're trying to eat us. All right, so this is really important. I brought these two documents with me today. This is the New Hampshire Constitution, and this is the Constitution of the United States of America in my other hand. And of course, your group, thanks very much. You're the Andover Constitutional Freedom Alliance, so you know all about these documents. Well, guess what? The cornerstone to the United States Constitution and the New Hampshire Constitution are private property rights. And if you actually go back through time and you look at history as a whole, the societies that are most productive are the ones that honor and have private property rights because they're the basis for you to be able to grow and be productive. It's that simple. It's really, really simple. Now, the problem is the people who think differently than that, meaning there are people who do not like private property rights because they want to control the land themselves and they want to control what happens. So, when these two documents were adopted back in the late 1700s, the trouble was that the cat was left out of the bag. All right? And so now, for them to try to go back in time and reverse things to the way that they want it, it's going to be death by 1,000 cuts. And that's what's actually happening right now all across America with the Sustainable Communities Initiative and with Agenda 21, meaning they just try to take a little bit away at a time so that you're not looking. And it's a lot like a cat stalking a bird, meaning if a cat stalks a bird, it's not going to run up and try to get the bird. If you notice, it may take a half an hour to get there. It finally jumps on the bird. All right, so that's exactly what's happening right now in front of you in your own towns right here in New Hampshire, is that planning, the regional planning commissions, the local planning boards, your own towns and selectmen are implementing Agenda 21 and Sustainable Communities Initiative items right in front of your faces. But you don't realize what they are. And here's why. Because it's a multi-generational initiative. In other words, if this was done, if they actually were honest and told you what it was about, you would revolt. Most of you would revolt. Not everybody. There are some people who actually think this is a good idea. But those of us who enjoy private property would revolt and say, you're crazy. All right, so they have to do it slowly. All right, that's their modus operandi. Okay, now, I'm going to read to you. This is really important because this really kind of summarizes the whole thing. So this Sustainable Communities Initiative, the way it's raising its head here in New Hampshire, it's called the Granite State Future. And back in last February, the head of the Nashua Regional Planning Commission, Carrie Deers, actually signed the grant instrument, that kind of started this thing in motion. It really had kind of been in motion before that, and Mr. Carson knows all about it. But there's a series of tons of documents that are part of this. I'm going to actually get it here right here for you. That are part of that grant instrument. And it's a legally binding contract. You have to understand that. It says it right on page 1 of the HUD 1044 form. but they refer to a bunch of other documents within this contract document, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages. And one of them is the abstract. I have it right here in front of me. It's called the Abstract for the New Hampshire Sustainable Communities Initiative. And this should chill you, if tonight's winter air doesn't chill you to the bone, this will. And this will prove to you that the Sustainable Communities Initiative is Agenda 21. All right, so it says right here, I'm reading right out of the HUD document. It says strategy to, this is the abstract for the Sustainable Communities Initiative. It's called the Rating Factor Narrative, and it's CFDA number 14.703. It says strategy to address barriers and incorporate existing plans. And it says right here, identifying and overcoming barriers. Now listen to me this is really important that you listen to this. One of the steps in the visioning and planning process to be used by each region will be to identify existing and potential barriers to ensuring sustainable communities and to articulate the strategies the regions will use to mitigate or overcome each barrier. Got that? Do you understand what that means? They want to find what the barriers are, and they want to overcome the barriers, and because they want sustainable communities to happen here in New Hampshire. Here's the next sentence. Everybody listening? By the way, when I read this, I'm going to warn you. If you're really serious about this issue tonight, the next sentence that I'm going to read to you, it will cause you not to go to sleep tonight. You probably will not sleep all night. All right. Anticipated barriers include New Hampshire's strong tradition of individual property rights and resultant resistance to planning and zoning, and a currently strained state budget that will limit state agencies' capacity to conduct future planning efforts. Do you understand what that means? So if the state can't handle the planning, who's going to do it?
Federal government.
Exactly. And it says so in the HUD 1044. All right, so now here it is. The key to overcoming these barriers will first be the detailed community engagement and communication strategy identified above. Those are the New Hampshire listening sessions that are happening right now over the state, and those are unethical meetings that use the Delphi technique. You can ask me about that later. And I'll finish up with this. This is right out of the document, I'm not making this up. It says right here, during the planning process, the Regional Advisory Committee will identify any additional common barriers and strategies and bring these to the Sustainability Policy Committee. The Policy Committee, whose members include decision makers from DOT, DES, OEP, etc., will work to identify potential statewide strategies for reducing and or eliminating the barriers. They're going to remove the barriers. All right. These strategies will then also be incorporated into the final statewide sustainable development policy framework. Now, understand this, that the HUD 1044 document, which we'll talk about a little bit later, and I'll show it to you, and Mr. Carson, I know, is an attorney. It's a legally binding agreement that has mandatory outcomes that the towns and cities in New Hampshire have to meet. It's right in there in black and white. It's really that simple. So that's really all that I want to say right now, because I know we're going to have a lot of questions, and I'll be able to bring up a lot of other points, and I wanted to give Mr. Carson a chance. But Agenda 21 is here. It's in New Hampshire. It's alive and well, and we have to do our best to beat it back.
And I'll remind everyone that please go. Okay, go ahead. And I will remind everyone that this is an opportunity to hear both sides of an issue. Some refer to it as Agenda 21, others refer to it as sustainable development. The purpose of this is to gather information, and I will ask all of you to please bear that in mind, so when we get to the point of being able to ask questions, please be respectful of those that have traveled so far to be with us and offer us both their positions, and respectful of the hall that we are in. And with that, would you please explain to us sustainable communities?
Sure. Let me just, I'm going to talk for a couple minutes, and then we'll get into the meat of the different items that people are interested in. First, a little more perspective about me that I don't think really, kind of comes out in a bio. I've lived in New Hampshire all my life. I've been probably one of the longest outspoken people about conservative issues in the legislature when I was a member. Long before there was a liberty organization or a constitutional organization or a Tea Party. I was one of the first sponsors of the Right to Work bill more than 2 decades ago in the legislature. I mentored a young man who was elected to the New Hampshire legislature as a 19-year-old and helped guide him into becoming a real firm conservative. You may know him as the guy who came in second place to Ovid LaMontagne in this year's gubernatorial candidacy, Kevin Smith. Like I said, I am a strong fiscal and social conservative, and I've been that way my whole life. And while I've worked for the last dozen or so years for the federal government, my philosophy hasn't changed one bit. I'm still a New Hampshire conservative through and through. I'm here tonight actually not as a representative of the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. I am here just as another informed citizen who wants to talk about a subject that I think a lot of people have a lot of questions about, and rightly so. I mean, there's a lot of information out there, some of it good, some of it misleading, some of it just not factual, but it all makes an interesting story if you play the story right. And I think that's what we've come across is that you can always find a mystery around the corner, a conspiracy down the road, etc. And I'm here to basically say that, as up until recently, the Secretary of the State Republican Party, we've got a lot more things that we need to worry about than what might be a conspiracy theory, because we've got actual issues here in the state today. We have, as my friend Skip Murphy says all the time, elections have consequences, and boy, do we have some consequences happening now, both at the state and federal level. So again, these will be my personal opinions and not the representative of either the Republican State Committee or of my employer at HUD. Just after the first term of President Obama, all the folks that came in and following, most, obviously many liberal folks who have, grand designs on, what the world should look like based on a liberal perspective as opposed to a conservative perspective. And I'm sure there's pluses and minuses to both sides that everybody can point out. One of the things they started was this Sustainable Communities Initiative. And basically, in the broader picture, before we get down to the nitty-gritty where people start to get concerned, sustainable communities is basically the philosophy that, as we consume natural resources, as we populate areas, that we should do some planning in advance to try and mitigate the impact on resources like water, pollution, air pollution, land pollution, make good decisions about, do you put the gas station right next to the cow farm, or do you put the school next to the gas-fired power plant to that? The things that we did here in New Hampshire all through the 40s, 50s, and 60s, which were the implementation of zoning laws in each of our cities and towns. Later in the 70s and in the 80s, we developed a thing called Master Planning Program, where we developed master plans to help cities and towns figure out how they should develop, as opposed to just developing willy-nilly and end up having those situations where, like in Londonderry, where you do actually have a gas pipeline traveling right through the back of the elementary school, or one of the elementary schools right in the middle of town, trying to avoid those kind of things. And one of the things that we did here in the state was actually to develop regional planning commissions. The reason was that doing planning, having a college-educated person with a master's degree in planning to help do that work was very expensive, and most small towns couldn't afford it. So we developed regional planning commissions and allowed the cities and towns to participate with the regional planning commissions to develop master plans. One thing that the state required, that the legislature passed, and remember, up until a dozen years or so ago, this was all conservative Republican New Hampshire, conservative House, Senate, and Republican governors. One of the things that we did, we the people, when I'm using the word we, it's things that we voted on here as citizens over the last 4 or 5 decades. We instituted these regional planning commissions so that people could develop master plans. And like always, like most things in New Hampshire, we allowed towns to opt in or opt out, because bigger towns that had a planner may not want to pay the fee to actually be part of the planning commission. Again, in the idea of not imposing a lot of fees and taxes, the cities and towns paid a fee as opposed to just getting a payment from the legislature. So the regional planning commissions were developed, and the cities and towns joined or didn't join. Some towns, even today, still are not members of the planning commissions. Some have opted out because they're not happy with it. But regional planning has been part of New Hampshire for more than 3 decades now. And here's the most important thing. Planning and zoning are all done here locally. The federal government does not have a role in planning or zoning in any city or town, or for that matter, in the state of New Hampshire. It just doesn't work that way. Tim showed a little bit earlier the New Hampshire Constitution and the U.S. Constitution, and we all know that those items not reserved are empowered to the state. So zoning and planning is done, for the most part, town by town, which obviously, one town meeting can determine something different from the next town meeting, and then 2 towns that are side by side might have competing issues. If you're in Salem versus Windham, Salem, they developed Route 28 with all of the city, with all the strip malls and things like that, and Windham wanted to stay gentrified and didn't do any of those things. So obviously they kept pushing all the development towards the Salem side of Route 93 and all of the housing and the farms to the Windham side of 93. So like I said, they have competing interests. But the cities and towns, actually do the zoning. You vote on zoning changes at your town meeting, whether you do it at a town meeting or you vote it on a ballot. But every town, the only way zoning changes in a town in New Hampshire is to be voted on by the citizens of that town. The people who do the zoning, I'm sure I'm telling a lot of you folks that already know this information, the people that do the zoning are typically people who are nominated or selected by your town council or your selectmen. The people that you've elected to represent your town, they in turn appoint people to zoning and planning boards. And for the most part, they're all private citizens who don't have a lot of experience in planning and zoning. And they rely on the town planner, the town manager, and in cases, the regional planning commissions to develop zoning ordinances and planning board ordinances. And all of those groups together work to develop the master plan for the town. Master plans are important because that's the only way you're going to get money from the legislature. If you don't have a master plan, you're not going to get funding for your roads or development for schools, capital equipment, capital expenses for developing buildings, things like that. So zoning and planning are big, important items, in the towns. But the towns control it. Now, as everything in New Hampshire, towns control what the legislature has given them authorization to do. Of course, planning and zoning is one of those things. So they can only do the things that they've been empowered to by the state legislature. In the state of New Hampshire, the legislature mimics a lot of what the federal constitution is, if you haven't read both of them. But basically, we keep a lot of control here within our state. And we've done that for a very long time. We do have a long tradition of personal property rights. I mean, we see that, with many things when towns try to take property for eminent domain to develop, either a road or a school or, some kind of private, or not everything but private development. We don't do private development here in New Hampshire like they do in Connecticut. So that's basically the process. And it's required. I mean, it's state law. You have to actually have a master plan in town. Now let's fast forward that now to, we know that the Obama administration came in. Obviously, elections have consequences. A lot of folks who have a lot different view of the world than what we do here in New Hampshire were put into power. They are people who are nominated to be at cabinet level positions. They select political appointees at sub-cabinet level positions, and they have all of their political staffs who, all tend to think the same way. I mean, if we in this room were running this organization, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development or all the other governmental agencies, we would obviously have a very different perspective of those of the people who are sitting here today. We might have a little bit different perspective than, maybe, during the Bush administration or the Reagan administration or something like that, but we would have a different perspective. And so right now, we have a perspective of people who are, for better or worse, the thing the term that I remember from when I was in high school in the 70s was that, we had tree huggers, people who are, really want to, worry about cleaning the air, the pollution, all of that kind of thing. And how do they do that? Well, they do that through policies. And one of the things that they were doing was the Sustainable Communities Initiative. So I'm going to talk about Sustainable Communities Initiative, and then I'm going to talk how you connect that to Granite State Futures. Sustainable Communities Initiative is set of policies that the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development and other agencies, DOT and EPA, have come together and said, look, we want to not spend money in silos anymore. We want to coordinate the money that we're being spent so that HUD is not spending money on the same road or the road next to something that DOT is spending money on, or we're not developing a building next to an EPA Superfund site, all of which things have happened here in New Hampshire and across the country for the last 20 years or so, as we push more and more money back to the states as opposed to the federal government building things anymore. But there was a lot of overlap. We'd spend money for the same wetland study for a building as we did for DOT, and EPA would then come in and do an evaluation of that wetlands that wetlands plan. And so we'd end up spending the same money 3 or 4 times. And so they said, well, let's not do that anymore. And so they decided to those three agencies, and now there are other agencies who are joining now, will coordinate that activity so that we're not doing a duplication of spending of money. So Sustainable Communities Initiative takes the philosophy of green building, which can be anything from as innocuous as making sure that you have good drainage on the site you're developing, to a certain R value in the walls or the building, all the way to the other end, which was is the philosophy of looking at driving urban development so that and suburban development, but particularly urban areas, to try and minimize the number of cars that are being used for people to commute every day, to cut down the amount of emissions in the air, reduce the number of vehicles going back and forth. And so, it goes from one end of the spectrum to the other, trying to get people to, what they describe as walkable communities, make sure that people can walk to work as opposed to drive their car to work or walk to the store. All of which, if you live in New York City or in Boston or in LA, probably are all good ideas, because driving a car, as you know, in Boston, or if you've ever driven in LA, is impossible. It's crazy. But in Andover, New Hampshire, like Londonderry, New Hampshire, where I'm from, that just doesn't make sense, because I could walk. I run to the past the 7-Eleven up the street, but it's 2 miles away from my house. My kids' school when they were little, it's 7 miles away. They're not going to build a community that's walkable in rural areas. So a lot of these sustainable ideas, while the philosophy is there, they don't even apply here to where we are. They may apply to Manchester, that if Manchester's going to do something, that they may want to think about having a walkable community, but they're not going to implement those things, like I said, in smaller towns like in Andover. So the idea of Sustainable Communities Initiative is this major push by the Obama administration to implement those kind of ideas. And I'm going to tell you something that, first of all, I'm not here to dispel any rumors about conspiracy theories or ICLEI or Agenda 21 or any of the other things here. I'm not going to even address that, because, to be honest with you, that's digging a hole that you just can never get to the bottom of. Because if people want to believe that there's something, that Agenda 21 is being implemented in not only the United States but New Hampshire, I'm not going to be able to dispel that, because I don't have a paper that says, oh, here's a signed letter from the President of the United States or the Secretary of HUD or the Governor of New Hampshire that says Agenda 21 is not being implemented. I will tell you something, though, as I was going to say, what was leading up to this is, when I actually talked to folks in DC, when I was down talking to the secretary and the deputy secretaries and that, and I said, we've got an issue where we have people coming up into the meetings to talk about the Granite State Futures program, and they're bringing up Agenda 21. And they went, what's Agenda 21? Oh, please. Please. They don't even know what that is, okay? I will tell you, look, like I said, I'm not here to try and convince you to believe anything, but I'm telling you the political appointees that I work for didn't know what Agenda 21 was. And remember, Agenda 21 was a document, a set of development philosophy ideas that the first George W. Bush signed as a goal that, we should try and, not pollute the world. But anyway, and I'm just telling you what the facts are. I have no, excuse the pun, no agenda here to try and convince anybody of anything different from what you came in the door from. I'm just telling you what reality is from my perspective. So anyway, they've developed the Sustainable Communities Initiative, and one of the things that they did was develop a grant program. Because the way that we motivate people, both at the state and federal level, is we give grants to folks. we subsidize behaviors. How many people here own a house with a mortgage on it? Raise your hand. Okay. What behavior do we subsidize for people to make sure that, or to try and convince them to buy homes? The interest rate deduction on for their taxes. I mean, that's a subsidy and an incentive. I mean, that tool was there to get people to buy single-family homes. So the same thing, the philosophy works the same here with the Sustainable Communities Initiative. They developed a grant program, and I'll tell you, they put huge numbers of dollars into these big cities where they really are concentrating these sustainable initiatives, the green building, et cetera. In places like New Hampshire and Vermont and Maine and that, we get a grant of money based on a minimum threshold level. If we were going to apply and try and get the grant at the same dollar per person or per square foot or per poverty level, we would end up getting nothing here in New Hampshire. So the federal government always says, okay, we'll base these grants on these criteria, and then we'll put a minimum floor on it, so we'll get a minimum to places like New Hampshire and Vermont and Rhode Island or Utah, where there's small populations and large amounts of land. But we want to make sure that all these states get something. The best example I use for people is the VASH vouchers, the Veterans Vouchers, which is kind of a Section 8-like program for veterans. In New Hampshire, we would be only entitled to about 50 of those. We have about 4 times that because there's a minimum floor that we get. So again, the money is used to drive folks to drive folks' behavior, both at the state and federal and at the individual level. So they came up with a grant program, and this grant program was that basically said that we will give money to organizations, government or quasi-governmental organizations, to develop plans that would follow along the ideas or implement the ideas of these sustainable communities initiatives. Now, the idea is that they will do planning for that. There is no money for actually implementation of any of these things. It's the idea is to get money out for people to start using this money, to start thinking about how do we plan for the future. Just as we did here in New Hampshire in the 50s when we said we need to start introducing zoning ordinances because building has been done willy-nilly and we're having some issues. So the money, there was 2 grant cycles. The first grant cycle, New Hampshire applied, the regional planning commissions applied, and they did not receive any funding. There were 2 small grants, one up in Lebanon and one up in the Upper Valley for $50,000 and $100,000, which was to do some planning in Lebanon where they've redeveloped all the mill area downtown, and then the regional planning commission, the Upper Lakes Regional Planning, Upper Valley Regional Planning Commission got some money to kind of do more regional plan around Lebanon, Dartmouth area. Now, obviously, I was upset because I wanted those federal dollars to come back here to the state. I mean, personally, the more money we get back from the federal government that we've sent down to DC, I think is a good idea. I also understand exactly how the planning process works here in New Hampshire, that we are required to have master plans in every city and town, and we rely on either the cities and towns actually having the money, or we rely on the resources of the regional planning commissions. Now, there are a lot of people who like regional planning commissions, and there are a lot of people who don't like regional planning commissions. They don't want to do any regional planning whatsoever. But in either case, that money is coming out of taxpayers' dollars individually in the cities and towns. So when the second round of funding came together, I sat with the regional planners and talked about actually having them get all together and apply as a single unit to get money to help fund their organizations to do regional planning and help the cities and towns do their master plans. They applied and they were awarded $3.37 million to do that. So that's how the money got here. Now, we can talk later on about whether there's legal binding contracts or all that other stuff, but I want you to understand that's where the money comes from. And it's the same as any other grant that we get here in the state, and we get hundreds of them each year for the state. We talked this morning about community development block grants with the new governor about all the development being done down in downtown Concord. We get grants from DOT to build all of 93 and all the things, all the on-ramps and off-ramps coming off of there. We get EPA money to clean up brownfield sites. We get SBA money to help develop small business in that. But grants are grants are grants. So we got the Sustainable Communities Grant. The regional planning commissions got together, and once they got the grant, I wasn't part of how they developed their plan. But basically, the idea was that they would develop and take the master plans that the towns have done with working with them, and they would put those together into regional plans and then a statewide plan. So we'd have a single statewide plan so that we could apply for more federal dollars. The regions in the state could apply for money that's coming through the community development block grant programs through CDFA and other state agencies, so that they would have all of this information saying, look, we want money to develop an exit 4A on Route 93 in Londonderry, which comes out to be Londonderry and Derry, so we can open up a lot of this land that's landlocked right now so that we can do business development in Londonderry. The same as the airport access road. And I'm using a lot of references to my town because I really participate in my town and I know my town better than the others. So that money came into New Hampshire through the regional planning commissions, and they took that money and started the Granite State Futures program. They asked cities and towns to sign on to the program to say, yes, we will participate both by supplying some funding and supplying, participation, that is the town planners. And some towns signed on and some towns didn't. There was some fights about, some towns joining. There was I was there one night late into the night with folks in Wyndham. It went to 11 or 12 o'clock at night, and the board finally voted to participate. Did a couple of same things in Rochester where the board decided not to participate. Salem didn't participate. So there were, towns that opted in or out based on what they thought was the right thing for their city or town. But they didn't make that decision. The elected officials made that decision. So now where are we at today? Well, the regional planning commissions are actually out doing listening sessions, asking folks, what do you think is important for the development in your city, town, or your region? They did one in Manchester about the development on 2nd Street in Manchester, and people were like, hey, this is great, we're going to get some participation. Some folks who actually had previously said to me that they were, anti-Agenda 21, after the meeting, I said, well, the money for this listening session is actually part of this Granite State Futures program to do planning, and they went, oh, I didn't realize that that's what they were doing here. I said, yes, it's planning for cities and towns and the regions. There's no implementation behind this. It's up to the cities and towns. And so that's where we are today. But just in closing, I want to kind of wrap this up in saying that everybody in this room, including me and Jen and Tim and everybody else, we are the voices that are going to decide what's going to be done here in New Hampshire. We are the voices in that we elect our selectmen or town councilors or aldermen. The ones that get elected, we can participate when we decide who's going to be the representatives from the town on the regional planning commissions. The regional planning commissions work for us. If we don't like what they're doing, we talk to our town administrators, we talk to our state reps or state senators, and say, look, we want something changed about the regional planning commissions. We are in control, nobody else. Now,
Thank you.
So anyway, that's what I was saying. We need to work on that.
Now, I will remind us all, we are not debate. Well, I am inviting questions. Yes, sir.
I have mostly questions for you, but I have actually I've listed now probably 20, so I realize.
Please give us
the couple of important ones, and maybe we'll come back.
Pick the one most important question you have, and then we'll give the rest of the room a chance.
Let me just preface it with this. I realize, and I'm assuming it's in good faith. I don't know you individually. You intimated, you represented yourself as currently even, but certainly in the past as a conservative. In itself, I don't think that means a damn thing. If I call myself a conservative, it doesn't mean anything to say that. What does mean something is the meaning of words. What you have represented here, and let me just, one quote, and that's where my question is going to come from. One way we motivate people is with grants to drive behavior. Look, the whole nature of the whole idea the federal government has any place in any individual's life in this room to drive them to any behavior whatsoever is, to me, obscene. Okay, and it's obscene because I see myself as an individual. I do not see myself as part of a socialist state. Unfortunately, HUD and all the people that run it, and you by choice, though you may have been a conservative, have chosen to be not a conservative as part of an organization. How you are in your own life, I don't know. But my point is, though, that you are representing things here as this grant money idea, and I'd like you to address this. How is it that you say that we're going to bribe you to do something? And I admit, people are easily bribed. I sit on a planning board, I'll just tell you one little point, and then you can
I'm going to
address
ask you to wrap it up.
Okay, and that is, I sit on the board, and this goes on the select board committees, it goes on the school committees, and what goes on is, for instance, we have an issue, comes up, and we don't have any money to do it locally, so we say, where can we get this money? And somebody pipes up, the Regional Planning Commission, oh, we can get a grant. Now, what that really means is that somebody in Topeka, somebody in Salinas, somebody in Oshkosh, Wisconsin is going to pay for that, not us, because we don't have the guts to pay for it ourselves. If it's worth doing, it's worth doing out of your own pocket and the community. I'm all for the community doing, but it's a community decision. What you're advocating is, in fact, this be taken
I'm going to ask you
entirely
that. What
out of
is the
community
question?
hands. And that's, so my question is, how do you make any sense of what you just said? Because I didn't hear any sense.
I'll address a bit of their questions and things. First of all, you can go back and look online at the state legislature. I actually have a voting record of being conservative, so I'm not just words. I've actually had.
I'm talking about now, sir.
Okay, so that's fine. So here's basically it. We the people have made the rules and way the system works. Okay, we have elected people. We have passed laws. We have voted people in and out of office for 200 years. And we, the people, are responsible for how the government works today. And we have that responsibility. And we, the people, as a group, have decided this is how it's going to be. Money goes into Washington, D.C., and then we beg for it back through grants and programs or tax deductions or things like that. I didn't make up those rules. Yes, I participate in that system? Yes, I do. I'm actually really proud of the work that I've done over the federal government. I used to be basically the chief operating officer of Medicare, and I saved the government more than $30 billion over the course of 4 years working there. So, I do consider myself a conservative. I consider myself a conservative working within the system. Because if we only let the other people work in the system, we're not going to have anybody representing us. So, but the point is that this is the way the system works. I don't disagree with anything you said. I find it, I would love the world where somebody tells me that, I have to pay X amount of dollars and here's how much is going to the fire department, here's how much is going to the police department, here's how much is going to the roads, and here's how much is going to education. And then I could just write a check for that amount and not all the other stuff that we do. I mean, certainly, national defense, veterans, things like that. But so that all this other stuff, that if they want to do it, you pay as you go. I mean, I was a big advocate. I mean, I really fought when they did mandatory kindergarten here in the state because we actually took away a very profitable and very good working system people who were running kindergarten programs, kids were getting access to the kindergarten programs. People couldn't afford it, they worked it out locally. The town would help out a family to do that. But once we instituted mandatory kindergartens, the state took that over and we started paying for the buildings so that the people in Andover are paying for the building in Manchester and the people in Londonderry are paying for the building in Pittsfield instead of actually having the cities and towns develop that. So yes, it's the way the system works. Do I like it? Nope. Do I think a lot of things should change? Absolutely. But, we can either bury our heads in the ground and say this is a bad system and not do anything, or we can participate and try and change the system, and that's what I'm trying to do. Sure.
As I said, this is not a debate. I'm not pitting one man against another, one idea against another. The purpose is to make sure that people have the ability to ask the questions, know, and find out the information to make informed decisions when these things come to our towns, because they do.
And I will tell you, I don't know that I've talked to Tim directly before, but I've talked to the other folks that have been working against Agenda 21. Look, I find the idea that if there really is an agenda that the UN is going to come in to do planning and take over, repairing rights, legal terms, water rights, in my backyard, or try and do planning for my city or town or that, I would be I am absolutely against anything in that philosophy whatsoever. And if I thought that was really happening here, I would be the first one out there waving the flag around doing it. But I don't think that's what's happening. But I understand that people believe that, and that's fine. And so I'm providing one perspective and Tim providing the other. We could have a debate all night and wouldn't get anywhere. So I think it's important that you ask Tim and I questions about from what side, from if you believe in Agenda 21 is coming to the state, Tim can answer questions about how that's happening. If you believe Agenda 21 is coming to the state and you want to ask how, where some of that information is, or you have a particular fact you want to ask or something.
I'm going to stop you there, and you invoked his name, so I'm going to allow Tim to respond to the statement.
Is there a Motel 6 around here? Because we're going to be here a while.
There's a really nice inn in Andover. It's a wonderful town to stay in.
All right, so I've been waiting to say this for like 20 minutes, and I'm going to get a lot of pleasure from this. So, Greg, I'm sorry I have to say this, but Greg said that he didn't have any paperwork with him that he'd be able to show you a connection between Agenda 21 and the Sustainable Communities Initiative. But thank goodness my printer worked today, because I've got the papers here and I've got all the proof right in front of me. And one of the things I wanted to talk about, I'm not an attorney, but Greg is, and this is the actual grant instrument that Greg's talking about. This is what Carrie Deere signed on February 1st of 2012 of last year with the grant officer from HUD, a guy named Thaddeus Winsek, I guess. And I'm going to read something to you. This is really important. This is on page 1 of the grant instrument. And it says, this instrument, the HUD 1044, HUD 1044 continuation sheet, sets forth a legally binding agreement between the parties as to all amounts, deliverables, tasks, periods of performance, terms and conditions herewithin, whether implicitly stated or referenced. The recipient, that is, Nashua Regional Planning Commission, who's acting in accordance with all the other planning commissions, certifies that all administrative and financial provisions of this instrument are in and will continue to be in compliance for the duration of the period of performance. All covenants referenced or stated are agreed to by the recipient upon signing this instrument. And it says right here, below this, immediately below, it says, this grant instrument consists of the following, some of which are incorporated by reference. And it goes on to list another 8 documents, some of which are hundreds of pages long. Now, one last thing, because this is really important. If you then turn back to the continuation sheet, and this is the scariest part of it all. I'm reading, and I'm not making this up. You can get all this information from that little website that I told you about over there. It says right here, HUD's Office of Sustainable Housing and Communities, that's the SCI, will work in partnership. Did you hear that? HUD is going to work, in other words, Mr. Carson said just a few moments ago that we get to do everything ourselves here in New Hampshire. They just give us this money, and then, we just kind of get to do whatever we want. We get to make our own little decisions. That's not true. This document, this is the grant instrument that HUD, this is it. This is happening right now. It says, HUD's office will work in partnership with its grantees to advance the program's objectives of the grant program. Do you understand what that means? And so you have to go into the documents to tell you what the objectives are. And I'm going to get to that in just a second. I'm almost done, Jim. This is the scary part. The cooperative agreement allows for substantial involvement of HUD staff to enhance, listen to that word, and I'm a professional writer, just so you know, to enhance the performance of the grantee in the completion of their deliverables. In other words, by accepting the grant money, we have to give something back, and that's what's covered in this book here. We'll talk about that a little later. In other words, it's called reciprocity, meaning if the federal government is going to give us money, we have to do something in return. All right, that's covered in these hundreds of pages of documents. I have them with me. Here's the last point. This is the scariest part. And if Mr. Carson, he's an attorney, if there's any other attorneys in the room, you will agree with me. It says, and this is part of the contract now. Understand, this is a contract. It says, anticipated substantial involvement by HUD staff may include, but will not be limited to. Now, do you want to sign a contract like that? Do you want your selectman to sign a contract like that? Of course not.
Okay, I'm gonna ask you to stop there, and I'll allow Mr. Carson to respond.
So I told Jen that I wouldn't go back and forth in debate, in that, and I would come and answer
And
questions.
I've tried really hard to not do that.
But I will break that rule this time, because I want to show you something, and again, I'm not going to try and convince Tim, or I'm not going to try and convince you, okay? He read the words, okay, and you heard the thing about grantees, okay? The term is grantees. What you don't read is the 700 pages of legalese that develop the what's called the CFR, the Code of Federal Regulation, that only incorporates grantees into that program. And who are the grantees? Okay? Tim would like you to believe that the grantees are the cities and towns and the participants, but that's not the way it works. It's not the legal binding contract. The contract is the grantee. The grantee is the National Regional Planning Commission. The cities and towns do not have a legal binding contract with HUD. Not for Sustainable Communities Initiative, and I'll mention a point in a second. But they don't have that. They're neither a grantee or sub-grantee. They're neither one of those things. So none of the things that are in those documents applies to cities or towns in terms of being a legal binding agreement. And that's where that's where the conspiracy part of this comes in. That if you don't understand the legalese, that only grantees and sub-grantees are legally bound, then nothing else in that document applies. It's just like your mortgage. Your next door neighbor is not bound by your mortgage. You're bound by your mortgage. The grantees and sub-grantees are bound by this contract. The grantee is the National Regional Planning Commission, and the sub-grantees are the other regional planning commissions that are getting money out of the program. But so that is the legal technical point. And if you would like another opinion besides my opinion, you can actually take a look at a document that's also posted online, which is a legal opinion from the attorney in the town of Wyndham, who basically just reiterated and said exactly what I said, which is that only grantees are bound by this regulation. Now, I will tell you, what people don't understand and don't think about is that every time a city or town or the state takes money, there are these kind of contracts. And when the city or town is the grantee, there's a legal binding obligation. And the example that folks have been using is they're saying, well, in Westchester County, New York, they took HUD money, and then HUD didn't like what they did, so they went in and sued them, and then made them put on all this, low-income housing all over the county. Here's where the legal facts come in, okay? Westchester County was the grantee for a block grant. And part of the requirement of that block grant was that Westchester County do an assessment of barriers to integration in the cities and towns. An assessment to barriers to integration, because,
I'm gonna have you wrap it up.
Yeah. Zoning and planning in some areas of this country still get done by race or, some segregated group. But the idea that the grant said you will do an assessment to barriers to fair housing discrimination. Westchester County took the money and said, yep, we did that. And HUD went back and said, okay, now, 10 years later, said, okay, show us those assessments. They didn't do the assessments, and that's why Westchester County ended up getting sued, not by HUD, but by a nonprofit organization that was interested in civil rights and stepped into the shoes of the federal government, a thing called the Keaton lawsuit, and said, we're suing you because you lied. Now, did the government say you had to do an assessment? Yes, you had to do an assessment. What did the government say you had to do? And what does the fair housing laws in the United States say? You have to do an assessment. You don't have to do anything about the assessment. You don't have to do anything about the facts that you found out. If you represent you did the assessment, you have to do the assessment. So it's the legal aspect of these contracts that apply or don't apply. And in this case, it doesn't apply to cities or towns.
The gentleman, the sweater, he's had his hand up quite a while.
One point on the Westchester County. The end result was that HUD said they were going to make an example of Westchester County for the rest of the nation. Summary. I won't go into the details, but that's what was stated. That's what was stated. And HUD
because
said,
Westchester County
we're going after
defrauded.
You, we're going to make you do what we told you to do. I think that's...
No, the federal court said you're going to do this.
Well, HUD was part of it.
No, listen, here's the thing. You need to understand. The United States attorney, took over the lawsuit from the private organization, and the United States attorney sued Westchester County for defrauding the federal government because they didn't do what they said, and they prevented them from actually paying triple damages to a nonprofit organization.
Okay, one
So-
other part of my
I'm
question.
gonna-
One other part is what is the agenda? What is the objective? What are the objectives for each of you to answer of Agenda 21? Because I will follow up what I think they are myself and what I've evaluated. But I want to know what each of you feels is the end agenda.
I'm gonna paraphrase-
The objectives for Agenda 21.
I'm going to paraphrase that down in 2 sentences. What is the main objective from both of you? Tim?
Sure. Agenda 21 is very simple. It's the redistribution of wealth and the taking away of private property rights. And it says so, you just looked at the
Okay.
documents, that's it. That's
Greg?
what Agenda 21 is.
I read Agenda 21 several months ago.
No, I'm asking you to sustainable communities, what the meat and potato.
Okay.
Two
So if
sentences,
you
what
take out
is
the
it
word
gonna
Agenda
do?
21 and say, what is the Sustainable Communities Agenda to do? What's their objective? The objective is to have cities and towns and states plan on development going forward in the future.
Sir?
You mentioned that it's the grantees and sub-grantees. You said the grantee would be the regional planning board, the sub-grantee?
National Regional Planning Commission is the grantee.
Okay, and who are the
The
sub-grantees?
sub-grantees are the other regional planning commissions.
Now, when a town takes money from the regional planning commissions, they're not a sub-grantee?
No, they are not a sub-grantee.
They're a
And-
sub-grantee.
Yeah, there's no such thing as a sub-grantee. And we actually have, there's another letter that explains that, because one of the cities actually wrote and asked us, and we wrote a letter back saying that if you're not a grantee or sub-grantee,
I'm going to ask
You're not-
each person
you're not-
one question, because there's so many hands in the
It
room.
doesn't make sense, because then you're telling me that if my town takes money from the regional board, we're not gonna have to comply with the regional planning board says, who is obligated to apply, to do what HUD tells them to do?
the cities and towns are not getting grants from the regional planning commissions under the Sustainable Communities Initiative.
Yes, they are.
How are they not?
No.
All right, no, one at a time now.
Sorry,
One at a
you're
time.
mistaken.
Ma'am?
I
No.
have a question about the data collection that's involved in this process. I'm curious why they have to know where all the water sources are, why they have to know where all the wells are in my neighborhood. What is the end aim there?
Well, I don't know why they're looking particularly for those items in your neighborhood, but they're looking for all of the resources and identifying all of the items that might impact planning or zoning in cities or towns. Now,
But they're on
that's
private property.
I understand that. I understand that. But the cities and towns have an interest in knowing where all the wells are, and so they've done all this. And the reason why it's more prevalent now is because now they're putting everything on using like GPS data to actually point out where all the wells and all the dump sites are and all the buildings are and all.
Okay. Tim, would you like to answer that question?
I think that the answer to Sylvia's question is simply that if you go back and do a little research, do your homework, and do Agenda 21, and look and see what remember, they want to categorize, they want to inventory all the natural resources, because the truth be told, the people who support the Agenda 21 movement, which remember is the Sustainable Communities Initiative here in the United States, is they want to control these resources, and they want to tell us how we're going to use them. That's the bottom line. That's why it's happening. So, but remember, remember this. Remember what I said earlier on in the discussion, is that understand that the cat got let out of the bag around 1776. Because once
I don't want to go too far back.
just wait a second.
Why just went back to the 1940s?
No, the cat got let out of the bag then. Remember, like we talked about, it was just because we, with our Declaration of Independence and with our Constitution, we were one of the first nations in the world to have private property rights. Okay, well, that really messes things up for the people who don't like that. And so now they're trying to take them away, and that's what this is about. All right.
The lady in black, please.
Oh, thank you. My name is Rosemary Landry, and I'm a concerned citizen. And I've been to various meetings, and two of the meetings I went to was last fall. Actually, the HUD, who is the HUD representative from Washington? What is his name?
I'm not sure which.
He was there at one of the meetings, and he stood up in front of a lot of people, and he said, he brought up that New York situation, and he said, we fixed them. We did this, and here's how you should be able to do it in New Hampshire. You have to get into the statutes. He showed everybody there how to do it in the different towns.
That couldn't have been a HUD person, because I would have known
Oh,
who
he
they
was a
were.
HUD person, I just.
If you could find out, I would like to know
I'm
myself.
surprised you don't know.
Well, that's not quite fair because he wasn't there. But what I would ask you to do
But
is
he
if you
should
could
know.
forward to me,
He does.
forward to me the name of this person and let's investigate it.
Yeah, I'm happy to do.
Because
to look
I don't
into that for you,
believe
because that's
anything
just
until
not
I look
true.
it up
I mean,
myself.
They shouldn't have said, if they said that,
They did
I
say
would be
that.
very upset about it.
And they
But
talked
just
about
so you make
property
sure that,
rights
people
also.
often confuse, different agencies that, they say that it's somebody
No,
who
I
HUD.
wasn't confused by that at all.
I'm just saying, I'd like to know, I'll find out if there was a HUD person that came up with that.
That meeting was in Concord, at
We can look that up, yeah.
The State House?
no, it was in the city of Concord at Graffoni.
At the Capone
At the
Center.
Capone
Yes.
Center?
Yes.
Do you know when it was?
Yes, it was last fall, in
Was
September.
this an African-American heavyset guy?
Yes, it was.
Okay, that was a fair
Who was
housing,
that?
that was a fair housing conference. He's the
But
Assistant
he-
Secretary for Fair Housing.
He got up and talked about HUD, and he brought in all these statutes
And-
and showed the people
Okay,
how
so-
they could go to each town and how they could get these statutes and claim.
I'm gonna have you wrap into your
Okay.
question, only out of fairness for the other
So,
people with their hands
One
up.
more thing. Last summer, I went to various water sustainability meetings in Concord. And at these meetings, they said that the main thing they wanted to do was get into people's wells in their own yards, in their own homes, on their own properties, so that they could regulate the water on their property.
When somebody does that, or when people are trying to do that, let Jen know and she'll contact me, because I will stand out in your yard with a sign,
Do you know who all
protesting
these
that.
people were that were at that meeting?
The meeting that you were
They were
referring
from
to.
the DES.
Yeah, that's the state
Government of
agency.
New Hampshire.
Right. But I have my own well. I will be out there defending your rights just as much as I'll be defending mine, my property rights and my well.
You're not doing a very good job of it right here, because I will tell you.
Nobody's coming to my town and looking at my well.
You can be conservative,
Okay.
from your.
The gentleman,
Excuse me,
All right.
Jen, but I want to talk about, since, I'm sorry, I'm just
trying
going
to
to
save
address
you.
your.
Well, I'm sorry, I'll sit down now. I just wanted to bring up those 2 points to let everybody know that I have been to meetings about these things.
and I gotta tell you, I've heard the same
Okay,
Same question about the well.
I believe there's actually a videotape of the discussion that happened at the Fair Housing Conference, and I will tell you exactly what.
What happened?
Yeah, I'll tell you, and I would like to see it if somebody said that during that. And the gentleman that I'm thinking of, which is the Assistant Secretary for Fair Housing, he was there for probably an hour and a half, and I was with him at the time because I drove him there and took him back to the airport. And I was there for the discussion about Westchester County, and he made the same point that I did, was that, which stunned people in the room. It said that Westchester County got themselves in trouble by saying they did the fair housing assessment and they didn't do it, and they defrauded the federal government. He said what is really ironic about that is that if they had done the assessment, okay, there's no requirement and there's no way, there's no law that allows the federal government to come in and tell Westchester County how they should address that discrepancy in fair housing. There is nothing in federal law that allows them to actually go into the state and say, you have to fix this. The federal government says, you have to identify it, but it's up to you to fix it. And that's what that gentleman said, and people in that room were stunned.
The gentleman in the back, yes, please.
Tim, you said 3 very, very key words.
Greg.
Greg,
That's Tim.
Tim.
Very well, to both of you. You said, we the people. That's the most important thing to understand here, is we the people have the power. And I was talking to you earlier, how do we deal with this? It's again, we the people have the power. You're doing your job. I mean, to be commended, that's the job you're told to do. You have no other choice. But again, it's we the people that can make the change. And we have the ability to do it.
A lot of we the people in this room that doesn't agree with a lot of this.
Well, that's okay, what I'm saying is,
This,
he said, what did you say, Mr. Carter, is it? What was it you said to me about elected officials? What was it you said?
Well, most elected officials, and we have a few in the room, and no disrespect, Valerie.
Yeah.
And
We have a selectman.
Bob, but, most of them want to be elected and want to be in office more than they want life itself. I mean, I used to be one, I know. I used to be surrounded, not you, I know that, I know. But not Valerie, I understand.
Have you served in the New Hampshire House?
Just,
That simply
No, they don't get.
I made that mistake.
That $200 every 2 years is just a huge.
That's
Right, right.
means having a voice,
all right, can I just,
And you're correct, it means having a voice.
peaceful.
okay, but could I just add this very quickly? So, to rebut one of Gregg's earlier points, when he said that, we would be able to control this here, it's all just kind of advice. The trouble that we have here is, I don't know if you can see this, this pie chart right here, this is, I picked this up yesterday from the Lakes Region Planning Commission, one of the 9 regional planning commissions here in the state. And this pie chart, see that big green area right there, which is 66% of the pie? That's of their 2012 budget. You know where that money came from?
Printing press.
Federal government. All right, federal government. All right, so the federal government. So now, okay, now understand that. Now, getting back once again, we're not going to talk about unicorns. We're not going to talk about rainbows. None of that stuff. We're going to talk about facts. Here's what it says in the Sustainable Communities Initiative, the documents that are part of this. Remember, this whole grant instrument that Gregg said is already in play. It says right here, it says the overall goal of the Granite State Future program, which is the Sustainable Communities, is to produce 9 regional plans and 1 integrated statewide development policy framework. But it says right here, it says one of the they have mandatory outcomes that are part of these. In other words, remember, if you get the money, in other words, they've accepted the money, they have to do all the things that, just like Westchester County said. Remember, we keep talking about Westchester County. I'm here to tell you, in the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages of these documents, there are mandatory outcomes that the regional planning commissions have to put in their plan, which then they basically, even though they say they're advisory only to the local towns and cities, they're really not. I mean, they're not, because the towns and cities adopt them for all kinds of reasons. But here, this is what's really important. Remember when Gregg said that, the federal government doesn't really have control, they don't care, we get to do it all ourselves. That's not true. Here's what it says in the documentation. Quote, aligned federal planning and investment resources that mirror the local and regional strategies for achieving sustainable communities. That's in HUD and NOFA, page 60 in the mandatory outcomes. Basically, it's saying HUD is committed to ensuring that programs result in the achievement of HUD's strategic mission. That's in the documents. I'm not making it up. All right, next question.
This gentleman here.
Can you believe that the United States felt obligated in embracing Agenda 21 based on its stake in the United Nations? And the reason why I'm asking that is because they're coming out with a World Arms Treaty. And what's scary is that the bigger the government, the more problems we have. And I'm noticing that this more than ever now with people, especially with Agenda 21 and all its derivatives. I just don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's really kind of an open-ended question. I think I can only answer this on a philosophical level, all right? Because I'm not privy to the private conversations that these UN officials have about this stuff, all right? So I don't know. I happen to be a student of history, and like I said, if you've not really studied history, world history, you really should, because what you need to understand is prior to 1776. All across the world, the history of the world were just different levels of tyrannical government. Feudalism. In other words, there was one person in charge. The pharaohs of Egypt, Genghis Khan, Alexander the Great, Rome. Rome was a tyranny. All right. Now, some were actually benevolent dictators.
Let's bring us to 2000.
I am. So to your point, what I'm trying to say is that there's still, in other words, America, though, was different. Our founders said, you know what, that's really kind of a bad way to do it. We're going to do it this other way, and they made a really great framework. All right, now, the trouble is, I still believe to this day that there are people in the world that were like the ruling class underneath the pharaohs of Egypt, that their descendants or their DNA still exists in this world, and that is embodied in the UN. And that's what you're seeing in the UN, is this group of people that are trying to tell the rest of us what they want or what they think is better for us. That's it. That's my feeling.
It's in our government.
Rebuttal?
Again, I'm not here representing HUD and not the Republican State Committee. My personal opinion is we should get out of the UN and get them the hell out of New York.
Now, I'm going to ask you a question that was brought up earlier, and I wanted to make sure, and I want to give both of you a chance to answer it. In reading Sustainable Communities documentation, it speaks about preserving historical properties and quote-unquote sensitive lands. In reading Agenda 21 materials, I see documentation in regards to private landowners losing the rights to their private property under the Sustainable Communities or Agenda 21, call it what you want to. And I would like to hear both of you, and whoever wants to go first.
How about if I go first and let Tim then can
respond
to what I say?
Address the private property issue, and are we, in how this works?
I have no doubt in my mind that if the folks who are pushing Agenda 21 from, that are in other countries, and the people who work at the United Nations, and probably some people who, work at the federal government and don't work at the federal government, but work for private land organizations, these big land trusts that, really want to just take up a lot of private property and make it open to public and stuff like that. I have no doubt that that they believe that that's the best thing to do. I couldn't disagree with that more. I mean, I think that, private property rights are sacred here in the United States, and that, we are responsible for making sure that we don't lose them. And the way that we do that is through, working with our cities, towns, and our state legislators. I personally have, I can talk to my state senator, well, when I get home tonight. My wife is one of the state senators, and she'd been a long time representative, before, after I was a representative. And so I have no doubt there are people who actually believe that and really want to do that, and that the UN and there are folks at the UN who really want to see that happen. And they would love to see it happen here to us in the United States, because we are the shining, city on the hill. We actually allow people to have private property rights in this country, and other countries don't. And so I absolutely believe that there are people who believe that. I just don't believe that the United States federal government is in cooperation with the United Nations to develop personal property, or to take personal property rights from citizens.
I get to answer.
Tim's turn.
All right, so
Wait, comment, let's comment down.
I get to answer. So fortunately, I brought the paperwork from the federal government. And this is from Gregg's employer, and I'm not saying that Gregg agrees with this. This is really important. I've never met Gregg before. I'm not going to say that he agrees with it. He just said he didn't. Here's what it says. Here's HUD's direct connection to exactly what Jen just said. This is comes from the rating factor narrative. It's part of the Sustainable Communities Initiative. It's on page 15 of that document. Once again, it says, one of the steps in the visioning and planning process to be used by each region here in New Hampshire will be to identify existing and potential barriers to ensuring sustainable communities and to articulate the strategies the regions will use to mitigate or overcome each barrier. Anticipated barriers include New Hampshire's strong tradition of individual property rights and resultant resistance to planning and zoning. So that tells you that HUD wants to take away your private they see your private property rights as a barrier. You don't have to have a high school education in English to understand that. That's HUD's position.
Don in the back.
As we see often in legislation that comes out of our federal government, that is couched in words that don't mean anything. Would somebody tell me what sustainable communities are? What is the goal for sustainable community? What is that?
What is it? You're paid for it.
Who wrote it?
You're in.
No one has any more resources than anyone else.
That's right.
Is that
If you got more water in your aquifer than your neighbor.
Is that what it means to this document? Is that what sustainable resource?
I've got it right here.
What document do you have there?
So this is the recognizing Agenda 21 in your community. It's put out by the Sustainable Freedom Lab.
Okay, and so I promised to make sure that I kept playing man in the middle and not being open about my own position, which I will remain silent on. Sustainable communities are places that have a variety of housing and transportation choices with destinations close to home. As a result, they tend to have lower transportation costs, reduce air pollution and stormwater runoff, decrease infrastructure costs, preserve historic properties and sensitive lands, save people time and traffic, be more economically resilient, and meet market demand for different types of housing at different price points. Rural, suburban, and urban communities can all use sustainable community strategies and techniques to invest in healthy, safe, and walkable neighborhoods, but these strategies will look different in each place depending upon the community, character, context, and needs. That is from what Sustainable Community says they are. From Agenda 21 site is a non-bonding, voluntary, implemented action plan of the United States with regards to sustainable development. It is a product of the UN Conference on Environment and Development held in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil in 1992. It is an action agenda for the UN, other multilateral organizations, and individual groups around the world that can be executed at local, national, and global levels. The 21 in Agenda 21 refers to the 21st century. It has been affirmed and modified at subsequent UN conferences. Would either of you gentlemen like to expand on the definitions that I've offered from both sides and perspectives?
The only thing that I would add is that from a marketing standpoint, in other words, the lexicon that has been developed by the people promoting this agenda, they have incorporated a ton of these fuzzy words. In other words, how could you possibly be against sustainable communities? In other words, they didn't choose that. In other words, if they called it, we're going to have communities where we take your private property rights away. Communes, right. Then everybody would go, no, we don't want that. So in other words, it's just, it's a lexicon. I mean, it's a language. It's a series of words and phrases that these people are promoting on purpose that make you feel warm and fuzzy. I mean, it's just, all you have to do is go take a marketing 101 class, and that's really what's happening here. It's just like in Star Wars, the original movie, the first one, said there's nothing to see here.
I'm going to give Greg a chance to rebuttal, and then this gentleman has had his hand up for quite a while way in the back of the room.
So I'm going to just use my 30-second rebuttal just to talk to the gentleman at the door there in the back who talked about, the idea of, redistribution of water rights and that. It's New Hampshire, and we have personal property rights, and we have a structure of government and a constitution that prevents that. In fact, it's been enhanced recently by our eminent domain laws. And a good example of that is what's going on with Northern Pass, where they're not actually getting the eminent domain that they wanted. And that is our defense. Our defense is our state laws and our federal constitution will keep us from having to do redistribution of property rights, because that is reprehensible and offensive to everything that this government in the United States stands for.
And the gentleman in the back.
Yes, thank you. What we have looked at is sustainable communities. What we have is 9 regional commissions, conservation commissions,
Planning commissions.
Planning commissions. Because they have individual towns that point. I'm from Rochester. They were able to talk about this, and so Rochester will not participate. Because what happened was we understood when we went to hearings that the National Regional Planning Commission got this $3 million, $3.7 million. The challenge that you don't understand is each 9 individual planning commissions has about $800,000 to $900,000 budget each. All of that is, you understand, and I think it was spoke of this year, is to get some college-educated people. I'm not one of them. Call it a soft-maybe businessman. But what has happened is we're going to make sure that those people on those zoning boards who maybe didn't get the right education after school because they have sustainable community. What do they call that thing when you get that paper at the end?
Degrees.
What are those sheets, those shingles? They have actually degrees in sustainable planning. Because this has been running, what has happened is that this is what, the money coming down, if I understood correctly, maybe I'm wrong, but what I understood correctly is this is the, what do they call that? When they gave the money to the people, you know what I mean? It was a bailout money.
Right?
Stimulus money.
Wasn't very stimulating, was it?
That stimulus money is coming in, you understand, they're only gonna have, it's only a small amount, it's only 3.7 million. But it's on top of the 900,000 each of the 9 community already has, to be able to put together programs. Understand, they're gonna have, and they did a beautiful.
I'm gonna have you wrap it up.
Yep, and I'll tell you, they have fiber optics. They have said this study, they spend millions of dollars to tell you in every community that fiber optics is good. When you get on your smartphone, is that hooked to fiber optics? That's what's happening when the government puts the money in. I gotta tell you, all those people on those 9 regional planning commissions are not we the people. They were appointed by somebody to influence you the people. So every time you can, back off on that.
Sir? Yes, sir.
I can concur with what this gentleman said. Back many years ago, I didn't like what was going on in my town, planning board wise, so I got myself appointed to the planning board. And I worked my way up to chairman, and it was a real eye-opener. I suggest to you that we are all permittees or there's a great deal of pressure from regional planning commissions upon planning boards. Had I not had a little experience from back when I was at prep school, we did a big master plan. So I worked with a Boston regional planner in high school. And had I not had a little bit of experience, and I was a builder, so I procured permits and understood surveying and all that goes with it. There is this thing, you work in the, I would suggest that the only difference between you two gentlemen is you work in the belly of the beast, and your level of acceptance is greater than his is, or perhaps mine is. And it's all gonna come down to, when are we gonna say enough? When are we gonna draw the line? That this stuff is all coming from on high. And who the hell drafted this legislation, these pieces of paper? Who was responsible for putting those words to paper? Whether they be very nefarious words that he's quoting, or maybe less nefarious words that you are quoting. It's the only thing that's going to stop this is to cut off the flow of money. Because the more money that flows to Washington, the more rules are going to come back, and the more stipulations are going to come back with it.
That's right. Here's here.
This gentleman had his hand up first, and then the lady in the back.
Yeah,
I'd like the question.
It will be.
Thank you.
Okay. I'd like to ask both of you, if the sustainable development and the Agenda 21 initiatives are such a benefit to this country, why hasn't the leadership of this country come forward to communicate these programs to the people before they were presented by anything else, and circumventing anything that's a federal kind of a mixture of confusion as far as I'm concerned? And when is the last time, I'd like either of you to answer me, when is the last time this country, this federal government, or a body who's been assigned for this, ever managed such a large program to be a success? Okay? And a successful outcome for the people of this country. Tell me. Oh, and where's the transparency of this administration in the meantime? Show me an instance where this has been transparently presented to the people of this country who put everybody in Washington in those jobs. Is there 550 mistakes in Washington right now?
Go ahead.
First. I did mention that I was, basically the chief operating officer of Medicare, so I'm still looking for that program that's been run in Washington, D.C. that doesn't have, all kinds of problems and gaps. And, we spend, for the amount of money of fraud, waste, and abuse every year in Medicare, we can insure everybody in the United States if we just solve that problem.
It's sad.
50, the Justice Department says $60 billion a year in fraud, waste, and abuse. Hey, my job before that, I was the director of the Electronic Tax Administration at the IRS. I'm the person that implemented where's my refund, so you go online, or you could do the free file program. Because my thought was, why should I have to pay for pay for the, the responsibility of filing my tax return, pay somebody else to actually file that for me? People should be able to do that for free.
You're admitting
So-
you're working for the IRS. I'll have my husband escort you out to
So
your
here's
vehicle.
the point, and I want to address it just quickly.
Let's answer the question.
But the question is, when, I don't have an example, or I can't give you an example of a program that money went to Washington DC and didn't have it, falling out in buckets on every side of it. Yeah. I'm not going to sit here and defend the federal government as being, some competent organization. I mean,
Does Granite State Futures offer a transparency?
Well, here's the thing. You're right about the transparency of the federal government. It's awful, okay? Now, here's the thing that I want everybody here to know, okay? That all of these hearings and all of these meetings that they're having regarding Granite State Futures are open to the public.
Oh,
you can
please.
go and you can listen. Now, not all of them are sessions. Some of them are working sessions, just like your selectman session. They're not going to let you sit there and ask questions and answer your questions for you. But they have meetings, I think on a monthly basis. I know there's at least one on a quarterly basis where they'll open it up and answer questions to people. You can go to those meetings and listen, or you can go to those meetings that allow participation and participate.
But they cancel them at the last minute. People show up and there's a sign on the door in Littleton.
Yes, I understand that, and I was upset about that too until the reason that meeting was canceled was pretty similar to the reasons why I was late tonight. It was the person who was actually doing the thing for UNH. Her father had an illness or something. But so I understand that. But the thing is, somebody said something before about these people are not elected. But most of the people, how many people actually know who their membership is on their regional planning commission from their city or town?
I
mean,
do.
do you know them? Do you go and talk to them and tell them that you're upset with this?
I've been to their meetings.
And that's
And a lot of people are upset with this.
I know. I mean, and that's the form in which we as citizens have to go and address that. And if we're not happy with the people that are getting appointed to those committees, okay, who by the way are many of them. If you go there, it's like a retirement organization for state legislators and former selectmen and town board members. I was upset with something happening in my town, and with zoning. I ended up becoming the chairman of the zoning board and spent a decade there making sure.
I'm going to slow this down.
But so the point is, you need to actually, transparency, you have to go to those meetings.
An honest yes or no question for you. Granite State Futures website. Is there a transparency on there that people that can look at to say, this is how it works, this is how we're spending your tax dollars, and this is the way you're getting it?
There are reports, and I haven't been to the website. I know they change it frequently. But there is a list, they list their budget information, so you can look at their budgets, where the money is going to, and what activities are coming up. Beyond that, because I don't actually manage the Granite State Futures program. I manage the contract that puts the money out. So
I'm going to let Tim respond.
Okay, so very quickly, I have something to say. This graph right here, I know you can't see it, but I'm going to stand up so you can see this. I don't know if you can hear me yet. This is the Granite State Future that's outlined by this raggedy line right here. And I don't know if your wife's ever seen this, Greg. She should see it. She would be really upset. Because these blocks that are up here on top, these are all the people that are outside of Granite State Future and have absolutely no input. And I'll read them off to you. The Executive Council here in the state, the governor, all the state senators, all the state house reps, all the town selectmen and councilmen, and all the town planners have no input at all or say in the Granite State Future, in the Sustainable Communities Initiative. This is a fact. Okay, now wait, let me finish, please. This is really important. What you need to understand is that we're going to go back to this, is that keep in mind that the money that Gregg's in charge of, it's his job for HUD to bring this money into the state. Don't forget, understand that the money's not free. The money has all of these mandatory outcomes. There are distinct mandatory outcomes that are tied. In other words, if you're going to take the grant money, meaning the regional planning commissions, they have to put, it says it right here in the documents, that they have to align their plans, whatever the plan is that they're going to do, it has to align with a federal plan. It says it in black and white. So, and then what happens is that those plans are, they basically come right down the highway to the towns and cities. And it says right here, it says the towns and cities, if you remember about an hour ago when Gregg came in, I'm almost done. and that back about a year ago, at least in the Lakes region, there were 11 cities like Andover, actually I think you guys were one, Wolfboro, Barnstead, Meredith, Moultonboro, all signed letters of commitment to HUD. They went right through Gregg's office, and I have copies of those letters. And basically, they signed on to agreement before the plan's even implemented. It hasn't even been defined in saying that they're supporting it. And I have copies of those letters signed by the selectmen, and these letters happened all over the state. I was just looking for the ones in Lakes region.
There was a gentleman over here who had his hand up. Was it you, sir, I believe?
I heard you talking about, I heard what Jen said, what the definition from sustainable, whatever, what their whole plan is. And I heard you talking about, Manchester, and I recognize what you're saying for bigger towns and stuff. And that's cool, that's what the bigger towns want. What concerns me, in terms of Tim brought up, and some of the things he's reading from, is part of this contract, I believe it was, and you're a lawyer, so you understand the validity of contracts. Why is that language in there about, and we know that one of the major stumbling points is going to be the strong tradition of ownership in this state. So if their big concern is just to more for the cities, which I happen to agree with, the cities is the people of the city, that probably would work better for them. Why do they have that language in there about, if we have a problem with anybody, we're going to do what we did, just like we did in Winchester or wherever it was, or whatever. So that's kind of why I'm concerned about this coming in. I'm also concerned because as a 60-year-old man, I've seen what's gone on in this country and the rights that we lost.
I'm going to have you wrap up to the question.
So that's kind of why, I want you to know why I'm here, okay? And if you can address anything to quell those fears for me, otherwise I'm concerned with what you're working on.
So just briefly, and I know, we've got, it's been a long night already, and that, here's the thing, and just by the way, I just want to say one thing. Somebody took the document off the website and actually drew that line around there, because actually if you look at it, it says the bottom line here, it says town selectmen and town council and town planners, actually points into that space. So if you alter a document, it's going to look different from that perspective, but it certainly shows that town council. I think this was taken off the actual Granite State Future's website, and somebody used a magic marker to circle around the edges and actually went over the line that actually shows the lines going into those locations. But the issue is the idea of I think there's, that we all should be concerned, we all should be worried about when government at whatever level, I'm obsessive about my town council and my planning board, my school board, and stuff like that, and I participate a lot. Whenever we put people in charge, okay, particularly, the folks that we elect, because let's face it, most elections are popularity contests. The person with the most, name recognition gets elected, for better or worse. And sometimes it's better and sometimes it's worse. And so, I know there were a lot of people that didn't vote for me in Londonderry because I was way too conservative as far as they were concerned. And so, but I had my own agenda. The thing is, I think if we are, attuned to that, there is interference from federal government and personal property rights. There is interference with state government with personal property rights. There is interference with town and city in personal property rights. But that's a balance that we have here. We have zoning and we have planning. And that the idea is so that not every one of us gets to do exactly what we want to do. We get to protect as much of our personal property rights as we can in terms of ownership. But sometimes there are things, sometimes there are very good reasons to have eminent domain. How many people have been down to the Boston Garden or seen the Federal Building, the Tip O'Neill Federal Building? There's one building in the middle of this little square block if you go into the parking garage entrance, there's one little 3-story building where somebody absolutely refused to sell. And so now it's a vacant building because you can't actually have any access to it. But that was somebody who just said, look, I'm not selling, and it doesn't matter what you're going to do. And they fought, and that's how they end up. And they were allowed to do that because Massachusetts actually has very strong personal property rights too.
And then
Connecticut, they didn't do
London.
that. Connecticut, they gave away the farm.
I'm really gonna
we all need to be the people who are the watchdogs in that. Now,
I mistakenly missed the lady in the back, and I'm going to let her ask her question.
What is ICLEI and how, is it the last phase? What does it stand for? ICLEI?
I don't have the acronym escapes me right now, what it means for
The
me.
International Council on Local Environmental Initiatives. So what does that actually mean? I mean, what is that?
I think they changed the acronyms recently.
It's the United Nations?
Yeah, I think they changed the term, but it's, I think that was the old definition. There's a new definition, but they're still using ICLEI, but it's another,
I wanted just to respond really quickly to what
NGO.
Greg said about this diagram. Is at the bottom, if you read it, in other words, at the inside of this Granite State Futures, there's all these different partners and people. These big blocks here along the bottom are the regional planning commissions. And this one block right underneath it, it says right here, town representatives to the regional planning commissions. And Greg talked about that, how each of the towns sends a representative to the regional planning commissions. But the bottom lines here are the town selectmen and councilmen and the town planners. They're outside of the box.
that box was written in there. Somebody colored that in with the magic marker.
No, I'm telling you, I've got the Granite State Future document.
I am gonna make a suggestion.
We go to the website and look.
Everybody, look, do not take,
If I'm wrong, I will apologize to Tim, believe me.
I'm gonna tell you what I practice in my house, what my husband practices, and what we have taught our son. Do not take anything that either one of these gentlemen has said for fact. Do not take anything that I have said or done for fact.
Trust but
Go
verify.
home, look it up. Go to Granite State Future's website, go to UN's website, go to every website and look up the information and make informed decisions for yourselves. Because ultimately, I think one thing has certainly come out of all of this discussion, and I have withheld taking aside, and I will not as a moderator. Elections have consequences, folks.
Don't they? Yeah, exactly, don't they?
I'm gonna, at this point, folks, it is 20 minutes to 10. I promised that we would end this at 9. I have to get up and go to work in the morning. My husband does, and I'm sure other folks do as well. I want to thank all of you for coming. If you think of any further questions or information that you want, I suggest that you visit acfanh.com, use our contact page, and we will be happy to get those questions and act as a filter to a limit to either one of these gentlemen. I want to thank both Mr. Carson and Mr. Carter. You guys both had seats.
We sit next to each other.
For being willing to come out here and answer our questions and have this open discussion, because it's one thing that government doesn't do well is allow an open back and forth discussion, and I think that this is good.
Where can we hear this? Where can we see
The
this?
gentleman who is here filming, Mr. Ed Como, runs a site called GovernmentOversite.com. I have his business card. He's going to email me when the footage is available, and we are going to link it off of the Andover Constitutional Freedom Alliance's website for future viewing for you to share with others. Obviously, we can't touch on everything. We've touched on a lot of information, and there's a lot of questions, a lot of great questions. And if you've left with something unanswered, please look it up and find that answer.
Can I say just one thing? For a lot of the facts...
If I allow you to say something, I have to allow him to say something, and her and him.
Okay.
And I have promised these folks I would get them out of here 40 minutes ago, so I am going to, forgive me, I'm going to stop it. I'm going to ask both gentlemen if you have information that you believe is websites that we can go to. I want you to email them to me, and they will be put up on the Andover Constitutional Alliance's website for sharing. And I thank you all for